I feel like I'm in with a brotherhood of men who really have a heart for integrity, for deep community, and for changing the world.
Welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
Today I am excited for our guest on this episode is Scott Larson from Straight Ahead Ministry. He is the president of this organization. So Scott, can you please discuss what Straight Ahead Ministries is about?
Yes, thank you for having me. Straight Ahead Ministries, we started 34 years ago, really to serve juvenile offenders. Our mission statement is to see Jesus Christ transform the lives of juvenile offenders. So we run the faith-based programs for a few hundred juvenile facilities across the country. And then we work with youth when they get back into their home communities. We have reentry workers and a number of different sites that help young men from 14 to 24 get connected to jobs, resources, and mostly to in some ways themselves, to be able to even believe in themselves when they've lost so much trust over all these years of being in the system.
So that's great to hear, and I'm glad that we have folks like yourself going out there and taking care of our youth. So I wonder, with this organization of you helping this youth, how was it that you heard about Crucible?
Yeah, well, one of the things, we've always known, I think what's unique about the work that we do is a lot of times people come out of prison just think, well, if I get a job or if I get back into school, they think it's some kind of mechanism that's going to make it. And yet, those who've been out for a while, when you ask them, how is it that you've made it? They always connect back to a relationship and something that was a shift in them. It's not what they think they need, but it's what really makes a difference, I think, for all of us. So I was in a process to try to find a young men's rite of passage program for young men coming out of prison. And I was intrigued. Richard Rohr had done like 14 years of looking at all different cultures that survived and found that every one of them initiated their young men or they became dangerous. And that's sort of the story of young men in prison, particularly, is that they don't know what it is to be a man. They look for power in other places because it hasn't been bestowed upon them. And so they have initiation rites into gangs. They have initiation rites into adulthood by whatever, getting a girl pregnant or being jumped into a gang or getting high for the first time. So I was looking for what can we do to help these young men in the context of older men come away and say, this is who I am, identity, not a crip, not a blood, but I'm a man of God. And so that led me to some work with Richard Rohr and that organization, and began to take some of those components. And at one of those events, I met the former executive director of Crucible, Chris Cleghorn, and was telling him about the vision that I had. He said, well, you should check out Crucible. There may be some elements of what we do that could be useful.
Okay. So you heard about it through Chris Cleghorn.
Yeah.
So now can you tell me about how Crucible has impacted you as you lead your organization?
Yeah. So like a lot of things, I got involved because I wanted to learn something for somebody else. But when I went to an initial weekend of the Crucible Project, it became clear that, wow, this is actually for me. And it was, and that initial weekend was very powerful. I think the best part of Crucible for me has been the community of men who've come through it, and the ongoing relationships that I have. The initial weekend was amazing. It was great, but I feel like I'm in with a brotherhood of men who really have a heart for integrity, for deep community, and for changing the world. And so I continued with this vision of how could we take this weekend and move it inside of a juvenile detention center, and found that there were a number of Crucible men in Chicago that were from the inner city there, had connections with juvenile offenders, and so we were able to pilot doing this whole program inside of a detention center. We called it Crucible on the Inside, and it was every bit as powerful as the weekend that I did, at an outdoor camp someplace. It had to have some modifications, but these young men experienced, what it is to be in the company of older men and receive that blessing upon their lives and get to look at the things that trip them up and keep them coming back and coming back. And so now we have this Crucible on the Inside that we want to start to do in detention centers, but also prisons, county jails, drug treatment programs, battered women's shelters, all these kinds of contexts where if something doesn't change on the inside, nothing's going to change on the outside. Most of the work, I guess Dallas Willard said, ends up being sin management, trying to manage our sins versus get to what is the core that drives them, which the Crucible has an amazing way of getting at.
So how did they get at that for yourself?
Yeah, I think for me, growing up with a lot of anger and I learned to survive. I was afraid of my anger, so I began to stuff it down, and it was a good survival strategy. But when you stuff down your anger and emotions, my mother was an emotional basket case, so I couldn't see any good coming out of emotions. But then when I got married, it was like, oh, this wasn't working great. My wife kept saying, I want your heart, but all I get is your head. And I was like, at some point, well, maybe there's nothing in my heart. Maybe that's all there is. Or what if what's in there, you don't want it at the end of the day? And I was like befuddled. How do I don't even know what she's talking about. I don't know this language, but she was missing something big. I didn't know I was missing it. Intimacy, or as sometimes it said, into me see. And it was, I even went to counseling a decade ago to figure out what's a feeling for me, because like a lot of men, I'd stuffed down so much of that, so I stuffed down passion as well. And Crucible gave me a language for that, a way to connect to emotions that weren't like, those are weak things for people who are, that's for women, emotions. I'm interested in the facts and getting things done. And it gave me a whole window into that this is a whole dimension of me that has been set aside or lost. That, my body and emotions are giving me messages my mind's often not even aware of. And so the ongoing work, and we've put it into the work that we do with our staff. Most of our staff have gone through Crucible. And then as they bring it to young men and women that we work with, we use a lot of the same ritual kind of ways of being together. And it's made a major difference, across who we are. There's been a lot more intimacy and intimacy that typically in this world, people who work with troubled kids are either professional, distanced people that aren't really connected to the kids in any way, or they're, just another one of them. And it's hard to see positive people who are on a pathway that these young people can move on to. And so Crucible has helped us develop those staff, because most of our staff have come out of prison as well. And when you survive that, you also have to set a lot of other stuff aside, like anger, for example, to just, try to stay within a lane, but you come at it a bit crippled without being able to access the full force of who God's made you to be.
That's good. So you mentioned that your staff have all gone to Crucible.
Most of
them. So how has that relationship changed from before they went to Crucible to after them going to Crucible? How has that dynamic changed, and how have you been able to lead them better, and how have they been able to communicate with you after that weekend?
Yeah. We've used a lot of the experiential kind of approach for a good number of years, but Crucible gave us a more common language around it, I would say, and particularly around the whole emotional connection piece, integrity, honesty, your word having enormous value. It gives us a quick language to come back into. And as I said, we use some of the exercises because some men who are listening haven't gone through it and some have, but there are some practical things we do within Crucible that have become just a part of our staff environment and our whole culture. And so even those who haven't gone through Crucible Weekend yet get the benefit of that. It's not like rocket science, but it's a very clear and direct kind of a model that is very valuable for building trust amongst those who are laboring together.
That's great. So it sounds like you've taken some tools from your Crucible Weekend and applied it with your staff.
Oh, yeah.
So you've also mentioned that you started to send some of those young men to Crucible Weekends, correct?
Yeah. A lot of our guys, as they get, so we start working with them when they're in the juvenile system, but we stay in their lives. And some of these guys, like my wife and I, started taking boys in the early 1990s into our homes, 7 at a time. So some of those guys are in their mid-40s now, and a number of them have gone through. We have a process of developing these young men and women into staff. So in their early 20s, mid-20s, we've had a lot of those guys go through the Crucible. And, to be in with, you talk about diversity, for them, being in with older white guys is a big diverse experience, especially when most of those people are either cops, judges, or social workers in their lives, and now they're one of them, and we're uniquely the same. Every man's struggle is every man's struggle. Doesn't matter whether you're a CEO, and it's one of the things I love about Crucible is you never really know who's a CEO or who's a guy that's here on a pass from a drug program. All that stuff is laid aside. How we typically mark ourselves by. Well, who are you? Well, I'm a pastor. I'm an executive director. I'm a counselor. I'm a teacher. I'm a drug addict. I'm, on parole. Nobody knows any of that, but we do have in common pain. And as Richard Rohr said, pain is the most powerful spiritual thing there is. Either it'll transform you or you'll transmit it. And so they get to see guys struggling who look a lot different from them and see that, they're not any better than me, I'm not any worse or better than them. We come with pain, and we've transmitted a lot of it. But that's not working for us really anymore. We have kids, we've harmed a lot of people, we've harmed ourselves, and if there's a way to have this transform me into something, then I'm up for that. And they get to experience it. It's not a teaching, it's not like a lecture or a Bible study. You get to encounter it and see it, and you get to actually step in and make some bold moves that shifts things inside of you, and not just like a camp experience and come back after a great kumbaya. Saturday night campfire, but some things have really shifted. And so, yeah, I would love to bring more guys into it, and I think it helps others too who come, who are, you know, just used to being around whoever they're with, and they're with another whole type of people. Without knowing their whole background, we're uniquely the same, you know, and the pathway to wholeness is a similar one for all of us. Starts with being truthful, starts with being willing, wanting. Jesus asked, "What do you want me to do for you? What do you want?" And so that's been a great process for us, and for me personally.
Yeah, I love what you had to say about one man's pain is another man's pain, because that couldn't be any more accurate.
Yeah.
And the fact that when they come on a weekend, you can be a CEO and you can be someone that just got let out of jail or a drug addict, and no one's going to know about that. Yeah. And you're all here just to be a man and just to go through this process. Yeah. And none of the outside world is present, and no one's like, "Oh, I'm a CEO," and none of that. Nobody talks about that.
No.
And everybody just encounters their work and connects with other people's pain, because you're right. Whether we're a CEO or whether we're just a person that came out of jail, we're all broken inside some way, somehow. Yeah. Everybody has deep hurt. So you put it really well, and I appreciate those words, because it really hit home for me. Because for me, I've been able to connect with other men as I staff and connect with their pain, and sometimes I connect more with them than the stuff that I went through myself. Mm-hmm. And it's just 100% right that one man's pain is another man's pain.
It's one of the things God, I'm so grateful He doesn't waste pain. It is such a precious commodity, and we know, you know, pain, problems produce perseverance, character, hope. We know those things, but even that character word is refined silver that goes through a crucible. And so here in this experience, we have created a environment of a crucible that not only reveals things, but it heats it up enough to where there begins to be some melting away of things. And what makes that possible is actually our pain and some of the destruction that we've caused. You know, it's like usually we'd want to repress that, hide that, deny that, stay away from it, and yet it's the thing that makes this whole process work. And so God doesn't dismiss this. He does truly use all things for good, and as Job said, when He has tried me, I'll come forth as gold. And gold doesn't come, it's not just dropped out of the sky, it's wrapped up with all kinds of other impurities and all kinds of other things. And the refining crucible experience, yeah, I don't think you can get there on your own just by yourself. And this isn't the only way people get there, going to the Crucible Project, but it's one of the ways, and it's intentionally designed to be that opportunity for men and women when they're ready.
Yeah, you're right. It's when the person's ready. You can't force someone to do something. It's when they're ready to do something, once they're ready to do their work. So you mentioned about these young men that have gone through these tough situations in life, and they've gotten arrested, and you've supported them, and then you've had them attend a Crucible Weekend.
Yeah.
As we say in Crucible, your initial weekend is an initial point. It's a starting point, and they give you tools to help you in life. And it's not going to be something that just resolves your whole life, but it's a starting point for you to continue this work and continue to change. How has these initial weekends helped these young men that God has placed in your life to lead them to eventually go on a Crucible Weekend and be part of Straight Ahead Ministries?
Yeah, you know, we're in relationship with these guys for the long haul, and our staff are. So we don't see them as projects or people to be fixed or problems to be solved. They are leaders. I was a stockbroker, and I made more money when I was 24 than I make now at 62. But it was like, if this is all there is, I'm not sure it's enough for me. I kind of came to a midlife crisis at about 24, and I've had many ever since then, but that was my first. But what I felt a call to was to work with leadership youth, and I went to seminary, I left my job, and my wife was working with juveniles, and I just I thought that was a nice thing, but I was really called to work with leaders. So the first time I went in, 35 years ago now, when her Bible study leader was away on vacation, and encountered a young man who was 15 and wanted prayer for court the next day. I said, "Oh, well, you're trying to beat the case, huh?" He's like, "No, pray that I tell the truth." And I was like, "Wow, have you talked to your lawyer about this?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah." I said, "What did he say?" He said he swore at me because he told me I could do 20 years. I'm like, "Well, listen, you can't be just thinking God's going to get you off on this thing." He said, "I know, but I know this way of my life I've been, and I don't want that anymore. And the Bible says you're supposed to tell the truth." So he had this childlike faith that he was in a crucible. He was locked up. His mother moved from Massachusetts to New York, and he was in this place, and he was open. And I walked with him then for 5 months before he went to Superior Court, because he did plead guilty to get his sentencing, and he told the judge as well, that he didn't want to leave the way he came in. He was wanting to live a different life. He was reading the Bible. She said, "I'm going to do something I've never done. I'm going to overturn the decision to put you in the adult prison system and keep you in the juvenile one till you're 21. And that's when I knew, I don't know many people at 15 willing to put it on the line like that when it costs you 20 years. And your lawyer's thinking you might be able to beat the case potentially. And I also realized that these are the leaders, And so they're already in a crucible. They're already in a lot of pain, and pain does have a way of changing you. It makes you bitter or better. But some of these guys are really ready that it can take a person to be 45, 55, before you really fall enough times. I mean, if you're an addict, you're going to probably get there quicker. And but just being at the bottom isn't the salvation. It's just the beginning. And so places like Crucible that can give you practical tools. Our job at Crucible isn't to break somebody. It's to be there in that space when people become aware of their brokenness. And if I'm hearing a brother next to me share his thing, it's tapping into my thing too, because his struggle with his marriage, or his struggle with his daughter, or his failure in his business, I've got that too. And so I see his courage, it gives me courage to start to step forward. And that's what I love about this work, is that it's a context for, it's not a formula, but it's a context for living a radically honest, grace-filled and grace-received life, as I believe we were designed by God to live. And sometimes religion and our ideas of God have unfortunately gotten in the way of it.
I want to thank you for what you're doing for this youth and these young leaders. It takes a strong man, and it takes a passionate and caring man to do this for young leaders, to give up your high-paying job that you had at a younger age and to accept the calling that God has placed on you and your wife, and both of you leading these men and leading these women in these situations to make them better. So I just want to say thank you for doing that, because I have a lot of friends that have been in those situations, being from Miami myself, like being around a bunch of gangs, stuff like that. So I know these folks that have had these issues, and if they would have had something like this, I think it could definitely change their life. And you're giving these folks a second chance that they probably would never have had if you weren't in the picture. So I want to say thank you to you and your wife for doing this.
Thank you.
So with that, I know that you were telling me earlier that you have a podcast going on right now, and that you're about to stand up season 2, and the podcast is called We're Still Standing.
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit of what the podcast is about?
Yeah, a lot of what we're trying to do is, reframe who these kids are. They're not urban terrorists. They are leaders. They're not cold-hearted. They're hurt people hurt people. There's reasons why they are the way they are, but beyond that, like this kid I talked about who was 14, Ricky Bermudez, there's a lot of them out there. So we, in our podcast called We're Still Standing, we interview people who've come up through the juvenile system and how they've overcome. You know, one's on addiction, one's out of, getting out of gangs, one's out of settling with your enemies in a community where half the city is, blood, the other Crip. It's kind of like Republicans and Democrats. And some are on abuse and how they've navigated it. That was season 1. We're now in season 2, and it's still called We're Still Standing, but the emphasis is on life lessons learned from lockup. There are some things that people either going to get taken out or they're going to be changed by. And lockup is one of those. It's that kind of crucible. It's like an addict. Either you're going to get brutally honest and keep short accounts and not hold resentments, or you're going to die from this. And so I end up trusting the people on the Wednesday night group of the basement of a church more than the Sunday morning crowd on the platform a lot of times. And so some of these episodes have been on forgiving a mother who tried to drown me as a 3-year-old by one of our staff, a woman, and another one, how he reconciled with his father, who really had caused horrific damage in his life around just things that apply to all of us, but I don't think it's an accident that half the New Testament was written from prison. It wasn't just that Paul, had a bum rap. That was part of his transformation process to be in prison. And when you are tutored from people who've walked that kind of path, it opens up a lot for the rest of us, and they have a lot to teach us. Sometimes we just think, well, I want to teach them, but like any person who's gone on a mission trip or whatever and really put themselves into it, they come away going, whew, I think I was the one changed. I don't know how much changing I did, but I know I'll never be the same.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's 100% right. I've been on a mission trip, and sometimes you leave there blown away and like, wow, did I really pour into them or did they pour into me? Yeah. And it's both ways. Yeah. Right? People can be in different statues in their life, and you're still going to learn from each other. And just like you've mentioned before, right, you learn through someone's pain. Yeah. And you learn through their experiences and their tribulations. Yeah. So the final question I have for you is, for those young leaders listening, for those folks thinking about possibly even going on a Crucible Weekend, you've mentioned that when they're ready, it's time for them to go. What are some of the signs you've seen of these young leaders that they know that they're ready, or that you know that they're ready? Yeah.
I think the questions, is this all there is? Sometimes we survive and we get to a certain place, and then like the things that got us here, we have the sense that that's not going to take us the next leg of the journey. I know that I've created damage, and I don't know what to do with it, And I also know that I'm carrying a lot of stuff that's come at me, and it's not working to just keep pushing it down. But I don't know what else to do. I've been going to church my whole life, and it's still not getting at some of the things in me. Those are great questions. Those are great places, and it's been said, when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing, then somebody becomes open, because it is painful to change. But wow, it's also a glorious reality that there is the possibility to do it. I'm not stuck, as I often may feel.
That's awesome. So I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for sitting down and having this conversation. And most importantly, thank you for leading these young leaders and giving them that second chance to progress in their life and to turn around and be the person that God wanted them to be.
For more information about our weekends, please go to thecrucibleproject.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rate and review wherever you are listening and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Also, don't forget to check out myjourney2.com for your free 2-week trial. That's myjourneyto.com. Thank you for listening.